like to welcome you to the Equip podcast, where we believe the Christian should be the most well-read, the most well-informed person in the room. And in the last few episodes, this is episode 25, we've been talking about different lines of evidence to prove. I believe there's proof, but the doubter, the critic won't consider proof, will say that you can't prove anything. But it would be the most reasonable to deduce that there's a God. And of course, my goal is to get you equipped to talk to that atheist brother-in-law, Fred, and really have some good arguments for him when that time comes when he does want to know. And you'll give him some thoughts and some arguments to ponder anyway. Well, and of course, this is the big one. This is the biggest argument there is for an apologist for a Christian. But we've got some inside information on the lost world. Romans 1, what a great chapter that is. But verses 18 through 20 says this: "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." So on Judgment Day, this is what the Bible's saying there, on Judgment Day, those unbelievers will be without excuse. Now, God doesn't say that flippantly. Believe me, on Judgment Day, he's a very, very just God. We know that. We see that as we read the Old Testament, and very exacting God. So no one will be able to stand there on Judgment Day and shake their fist at God and say, "You're not fair, you never gave me a chance. There was no way of me knowing about you." Well, no. They will be without excuse. And I believe God makes sure. Boy, they'll be able to say, "Hey, you remember that time?" For me, it was when I looked up at the stars, and God was definitely working on my heart. The heavens declare the glory of God, and that led me eventually to get saved. Not that moment, because I needed the Word of God. I needed special revelation. That was natural revelation that draws us to the truth, and then somebody came along with the Bible, and eventually then I would get saved. But one thing I learned from J. Warner Wallace, a really good book, Cold Case Christianity, and he's got several really good books. He's writing a new one. I'm anxious to read that one. But with this idea of evidence that we've been talking about and the lines of evidence, well, and I've always heard this, and even law shows or whatever the case is, you hear a lawyer yell, "Well, that's only circumstantial evidence." Circumstantial evidence. And it was in my mind that, circumstantial evidence must not be very good. Well, J. Warner Wallace clued me in to the fact that he said most of my cold case cases have been circumstantial. He said the only other thing than circumstantial is called direct evidence, and that's eyewitness evidence. And a lot of times, especially in cold cases, but there's not eyewitness. So it's all circumstantial. But here we go. Billy was there the night that the murder happened. Well, that doesn't tell you he did it. Billy was there. Okay, well, that's not an open and shut case. That's circumstantial. He was there. A lot of people were there. Well, Billy also said, "One day I'm going to kill that guy." Okay, well, there we go. Doesn't mean he did it. Well, also the day before, he purchased a gun, the exact same caliber of the bullet hole in the victim. Okay, well, see, this is all circumstantial. All circumstantial. At the time of the murder, everybody else at the party left, and it was just those two, Billy and the victim. Oh, wow. Okay. Now, as you can see, that's all circumstantial evidence, but as you add to it more and more circumstantial evidence, he said he was going to do it. He went out and bought a gun. He was there, and you add some more lines, and it's like, no brainer. Billy did it. We don't have an eyewitness, but there's enough evidence. See, so that's what we're trying to do with this line of evidence with proof of God, proof that there is a God. Well, we talked about the cosmological argument. That was the first one. And we came down to either created itself, couldn't happen. It was always there, couldn't happen. We're left with one alternative. Somebody created the universe. Now, if it's the God of the Bible or not, intelligent design. It just proves there's an intelligent designer. And I'll give them that. Well, that doesn't prove it's the God of the Bible. Well, the God of the Bible has all those characteristics that are needed, and he's the only God with those characteristics that are needed: immaterial, spiritual, unbelievably powerful and wise, a personal God. So we'll leave it at that. But the cosmological argument, why is there something rather than nothing? Then the last time, episode 24, was the design argument, the probability that the universe could just come into existence and be perfectly designed. Well, fine-tuning is the term they use, the fine-tuning argument. If you like a big word, they call it the teleological argument. That fine-tuning argument, they call it. Everything was so finely tuned, there had to be a tuner. It couldn't happen. The probability of it just happened to be all these finely tuned characteristics of chemistry and the universe and physics and all those things point to, boy, there had to be somebody tuning it. Well, actually, this is my favorite one, my personal favorite one. And actually, because it is, I might have to split this into two because I love this one. Now, I can't think of his name now. His name will come to me. But he believes, he's a really, really powerful philosopher. And I can't believe his name slipped my mind right now. But he believes the cosmological argument for him is the strongest. But then he said, what really affects people more, though, is the moral argument. And this is my personal favorite argument. And the question just comes, is asked, where did right and wrong come from? Where did right and wrong come from? Are there objective, universal values, universal right and wrongs? Objective means it's not opinion. It's cut and dried. This is wrong. It's always wrong. That's objective. Universal, everywhere, all over the world. This is wrong. Well, a syllogism would be this, and this is a line of logic. If there is no God, there are no objective, universal values, right and wrong. But there are objective, universal, moral values. Therefore, there has to be, and the argument, and you'll hear me say, there has to be a God. There has to be a moral lawgiver if there's these universal, objective moral laws. Now, C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man said this, and I'll just sum it up. I don't have necessarily a quote, but all people groups throughout the world, from very sophisticated to primitive, they agree on a number of values. And this I know, they just so happen to correspond with the Ten Commandments. So that's interesting, and we'll get into that, and again, maybe even in the next podcast. But I love when an atheist will say disparaging things about God often, and I think that's just to get the ire of the Christian. But they'll call God, that God has done evil. God's what Richard Dawkins wrote in I think the beginning of his God Delusion book, just calling God all these horrible names. He's misogynist, and he's a murderer, and he's egotistical, and just on and on and on and on, infanticidal, and all these things. And that God is evil. Or I remember I guess they had a campaign in Britain. And of course, we have, signs on the side of our buses. And this was a campaign during Christmas. And it was funded by the atheists. And it wrote on the side of the bus, "There's probably no God. So, you don't have to live your life of paranoia. Just have fun, in other words. But then, because it's Christmas time, there is no God. So this is what it said: be good for goodness sake. Not because you're afraid of God and lightning's going to strike you if you don't do good. Of course, they mock. But be good for goodness sake." Or the idea that God is evil, God has done wrong. Well, now this plays right into this argument. If you declare either that God is evil or has done evil, or even there's evil in the world, and then you say, be good for goodness sake. Well, let me ask you, what's good and what's evil? And according to who? See, you're assuming there's such a thing as good and there's such a thing as evil. Well, if you assume that, you're also assuming that there is a standard of good and a standard of evil. And then you have to there is a moral lawgiver that determines this. Otherwise, it would be just, well, that's your preference. This is wrong. Well, why is it wrong? Well, you prefer that? Once we leave the truth, I wish I was this eloquent, but I read this from somebody. Once we leave the truth of the Bible, the truth drowns in a sea of opinion. And again, it's just like I said, preference or, well, that's your opinion. In fact, evil, murder, theft happens in the animal world all the time. And by the way, that's your worldview, being that we're just animals. Why would that be wrong anyway? The atheists, the critics, and other people also, not necessarily the atheists, but we're zeroing in on this because we want to give proof of the existence of God. But they cry for respect, for human rights, for Black Lives Matter, trans rights. Well, wait a second. Where do you think these rights come from? And Black lives do matter, and we do deserve respect. Everybody does. Everybody does. But wait a second. You don't see any of that in the animal world. And here we go. Your worldview has to be consistent. And talk about inconsistency in the atheistic world, the evolutionary world. You have people talking about evil or rights, or that murder is wrong and various things are wrong. And now, wait a second. You just told me we're animals and we evolved from animals. You just told us that. And yet, you don't want us to act like animals. And you expect all these rights and us to, well, you know what? That's inconsistent. Really, to tell you the truth, a lion kills a zebra all day long. And in the animal world, that's A-okay. That's survival of the fittest. Now, but see, they don't live that way. They say we evolve from animals, and yet they love their wife and love their kids and expect respect. And by the way, they see somebody murdered somebody on the television, and they want justice to be done. But yet they go off and teach, as a professor, they teach evolution to those kids. See, it's inconsistent. And then there's something wrong with that worldview. And the problem with that, of course, we all know murder's wrong, but of course we all know. But if there's no God, see, there's nothing to ground that thought or that belief or that moral value to. Nothing. No anchor for that. Well, sometimes, and you see it in society. So, well, I guess it's not wrong anymore. Guess that's not so bad. Well, we evolve and now it's not bad anymore. Well, now what's your new values attached to? Nothing. So there's no grounding. In fact, they have to come and steal from the Christian worldview when it comes to morality. And of course, when they say evil, when we talk about evil, it's usually perpetrated on a person. Well, why is it wrong to do evil to that person? See, deep down inside, we know they know that person has intrinsic value, and they do have rights, certain unalienable rights given by the Creator. See, we know that. We know that. Now, let me do a thought experiment, and then we're going to end episode 1 of this. Will be a 2-parter. This moral argument is so deep and so rich and so good. But let me ask you this, and again, ask atheist Uncle Fred this, where right and wrong comes from. But just a thought experiment here. What if Hitler could convince all of the SS, and by the way, he did, probably, convince the SS that it is okay to murder and incinerate Jews? Is it still wrong? What if he could convince the entire Wehrmacht, the German army, that murdering and incinerating Jews are okay? Is it still wrong? And I'm assuming you're saying, yeah, it's still wrong. What if he would convince all of Germany it's okay to gas and incinerate Jews? Well, it's still wrong. What if he could convince the entire world? Hitler convinces everybody it is okay. Now, it is a moral good. And the whole world's convinced. Is it still wrong? And I'm hoping you're saying, yeah, yes, it's still wrong. Wait. The whole world says it's right. Still wrong. Proves that law, murder, moral absolutes there's a law that transcends every human being on earth. And if there's a law, it doesn't matter if the whole world says it's good, we know it's still wrong. There's a moral law that transcends all of us. And there has to be a moral lawgiver that gives us those transcendent laws. Stay tuned for part 2.